Disaster can strike an unsuspecting aircraft for many different reasons. When it does, no one wants it to happen. But that's not always the case. Some incidents that air investigators are called to solve turn out to be deliberate. These are the disasters that someone, somewhere, wanted to happen.
This is a public safety announcement. For your protection, never leave your personal belongings, carry-on baggage, or parcels unattended for any reason. Also, never take another person's baggage or packages onto an aircraft with you. Report anything questionable to the nearest airline employee or airport police officer. Thank you.
When deliberate damage to aircraft is suspected, the air investigators play second fiddle to the criminal detectives. That's what happened on December the 7th, 1987, when 43 people took off on Pacific Southwest Airlines Flight 1771 from Los Angeles. It was due in San Francisco at 4:43, but it never arrived. Putting together the puzzle of what happened to Flight 1771 was to shock even the most grizzled detectives.
Good evening, and thanks so much for joining us on this Monday, December 7th. We have lots to tell you about, and we will lead off with what is apparently a plane which has crashed near Templeton this evening. The plane went down about 4:25, we understand, and we have no confirmation.
Well, I'm the sheriff, coroner, and marshal of San Luis Obispo County, an area of 3,300 square miles. Well, on the way to the crash site, we received information that there was possibly gunshots involved. I assumed that maybe gunshots were from the ground up.
The first detective to arrive at the scene was Bill Wammock.
I couldn't comprehend at first that this was something larger than perhaps a small single-engine private aircraft. And I kept thinking perhaps he was carrying newspapers. It just seemed to be nothing but papers blowing gently in the wind, hanging in the trees. The thought never occurred to me that it was actually bits and pieces of a large aircraft, a commercial aircraft, bits and pieces of passengers' luggage, and in some cases bits and pieces of a human being.
The plane came down about 10 degrees over vertical at about 720 miles an hour when it hit the ground.
There was nothing that had any shape to it that was recognizable. Most things torn and jagged, small pieces. In the most cases, no larger than.
We found personal belongings, driver's licenses, credit cards, pictures of family members. We put them in plastic bags, labeled them with the grid area which we were searching, and turned that over to the coroner.
Parts of bodies would be placed in one bag, any evidence or parts of a plane that they thought was of some significance placed in another.
On the second day of the search, investigators made a vital find. Amongst the millions of tiny pieces of wreckage was what looked like the trigger and barrel of a handgun.
On the morning of December 9th, an FBI agent located that gun in the tree area behind me, and I was at the time standing at that tree. He brought it to my attention without disturbing it. I stepped over to where he was located, and we did confirm that it was what appeared to be a .44 Magnum stainless steel handgun.
But who did the gun belong to? The way the detectives found out was remarkable.
In the serration of the trigger, we found that there had been an accumulation of skin, as if the gun had been ripped from the index finger area, and some skin had been included in those ridges.
The tissue was rolled out, flattened out, to see if we could find fingerprint ridges, thumbprint ridges, palm prints, anything that we could possibly identify to somebody's known fingerprints.
Meanwhile, the FBI had been checking the passenger manifest of those who'd boarded Flight 1771. On that list was a man named David Burke, whose fingerprints were on file.
We were able to determine skin that was in fact the fingerprint of Mr. Burke.
Now investigators had a suspect and a weapon, but they still needed a motive. The FBI soon discovered one. Burke had been fired by the airline just 2 weeks earlier.
David Burke was terminated for stealing $69 from the aircraft cocktail fund that the flight attendants maintained. He appealed his termination and had a hearing scheduled on December the 7th, which is the day of this incident, at 2 p.m. in the afternoon before Ray Thompson, who was his supervisor. And at that time, David Burke learned that his appeal was not being granted. As he left the office, the secretary to Ray Thompson at the time remarked to David Burke, in an effort to ease, I believe, the tension that was in the office, "Will David have a good day," or words to that effect. And he paused upon leaving and looked at her and said, "I intend to have a very good day."
With that, Burke went to buy a ticket for Flight 1771 to San Francisco, a flight he knew his boss, Ray Thompson, traveled home on daily. And with his ticket in his hand, Burke went off to get his gun.
David Burke smuggled the gun on the aircraft using his identification as an airline employee to circumvent the security and allow him entry into the secure area with a weapon. And that identification was found at the scene of the crash.
This is the kind of gun used by Mr. Burke that he took on the airplane and fired it in a very confined place. This is a .357 Magnum. He used a .44 Magnum, but in all other respects, they're exactly the same.
During our investigation on the scene of the crash, we recovered a air sickness bag. And on that bag was written a note, obviously addressed to Ray, we believe Ray Thompson.
I was startled by that because things were blowing all over the place, as I said, 7-8 miles away in a very large area. And we had what appeared to be millions of pieces of paper out there.
And the note we have determined, the laboratory, the FBI Identification Division has determined was written by David Burke. The letter, or the note, said, "Hi, Ray. It's kind of ironical, isn't it, that we end up like this? I asked for leniency for my... Well, I got none, and you'll get none."
What finally allowed the detectives to piece together the last moments of Flight 1771 was the discovery amongst the wreckage of the cockpit voice recorder, the so-called black box. After overnight analysis in Washington, the tape was rushed back to the crash site.
When we got the tape back from the contents of the black box, I was out on the scene and we found a car that had a tape player in it. So several of us, the head of the FBI and others, sat to see what had happened in that cockpit.
Through the analysis of the voice recorder, we heard the door to the restroom right next to Ray Thompson open and close just seconds before the first shots were overheard. We believe that Ray probably received the note from David Burke as David Burke went to the restroom, and that he then came out of the restroom with his revolver unsheathed, and that he immediately shot Ray Thompson.
The next thing that you could hear on the tape was a door opening and a female voice saying something to the words of "there's a problem." You could hear either the captain or the co-pilot ask what the problem is. You could hear another male voice say something to the effect of "I'm the problem."
And then there are additional gunshots.
The conclusion that we've come to is that Mr. Burke entered the cockpit and executed both the pilot, the co-pilot.
And then there is the sound of the plane increasing in speed as it's heading toward the ground. Obviously, Mr. Burke has got the controls at this point, and then all of a sudden, there is an additional gunshot, and then there is dead silence.
I can't imagine being a passenger on that airplane, knowing that this man had just fired a shot, and then knowing that you're hearing another shot, and then knowing that the plane is going down, and you have no time to even lean over to your loved one and say, "I love you."
From the time the first shots were heard until the time of impact of this aircraft hitting the ground, approximately 47 seconds elapsed. Those were 47 terror-filled seconds to the passengers aboard Flight 1771.
This entire incident took place because Mr. Burke was fired for stealing $69. It was a mass murder. It was a suicide. It was a plane crash. It seems like a very significant disparity between $69 and the loss of this aircraft and 43 people.
Can you just bring your arm around? Yeah.
In the early 1970s, explosives expert Walter Korsgaard was asked to set up a counter-bombing unit for the body which regulates America's flying industry, the Federal Aviation Administration.
Part of my job there was making speeches around the country. And in the process, while I'm talking about the bombers, I would build a device to show how anybody could do it. I would buy all the components right in the town where I was. And little by little, it would come together. And of course, what I would attempt to do would be to set the clock, the timer, if you will, so that the bomb would go off. Of course, not like a regular bomb, but with a good flash and a little booming and some smoke to get the audience's attention.
In the late 1980s, Walter Korsgaard was to be a key figure in solving the puzzle of one of the most enduring tragedies in civil aviation. On December the